March 15, 1962. Courtroom 4, Manhattan Criminal Court. Bumpy Johnson sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit, facing 15 years minimum. Detective Frank Morrison stood on the witness stand, hand raised, swearing to tell the truth. Morrison was 48, decorated, clean record, respected, the perfect witness. I personally observed the defendant directing a narcotics distribution network from February through August of 1961, Morrison stated, his voice steady and convincing. Everyone expected Bumpy to receive a decade and a half behind bars. The judge had already written notes suggesting sentencing guidelines. But what Detective Morrison didn't know, Bumpy Johnson had been documenting the cops' every move for 8 months straight. 2 hours later, Morrison walked out of that courtroom confident. He'd lied perfectly. He'd built the case perfectly. Then, at 4:33 p.m. that same day, a federal agent walked into his captain's office with a manila folder containing photographs, receipts, and bank records. Morrison's hands went cold. This is the story of how Bumpy Johnson didn't just beat a murder charge, he dismantled a detective who thought he was untouchable. How did he do it? How did a man facing 15 years turn the tables so completely that the liar became the prisoner? Think you could have survived this? Manhattan in 1961 was carved into territories. The police department wasn't neutral, it was weaponized. Officers like Frank Morrison controlled entire precincts, deciding which criminals operated freely and which ones got prosecuted. Morrison had been on the force for 19 years, and in that time, he'd built a kingdom. He skimmed money from dealers, took protection payments from 5 different criminal enterprises, and used his badge to eliminate competition for the men paying him off. Morrison's track record was brutal. He'd falsified evidence in 47 cases over 2 decades. 23 men he testified against were currently serving time. 11 had been innocent. The NYPD protected him because he closed cases, and closed cases made the department look good. Captains got promotions, politicians got credit, and Morrison got richer. Bumpy Johnson was a problem Morrison wanted solved, not arrested, fairly solved. Bumpy had refused to pay Morrison his cut after taking over Harlem's numbers operation in 1960. That was a direct challenge to authority. That was disrespect. Morrison didn't just want money, he wanted humiliation. July 3, 1961. 2 months earlier, Morrison walked into a warehouse on 132nd Street where Bumpy was meeting with his numbers runners. "I'm taking 50% of your take, Johnson, or every operation you run gets busted," Morrison said, his hand resting on the service weapon. Bumpy didn't flinch. "That's not how this works, detective." That refusal cost him. Starting July 15th, Morrison began raiding Bumpy's locations. July 15th, a numbers parlor on Lenox Avenue seized. July 22nd, 4 Bumpy's lieutenants arrested on possession charges that wouldn't hold up in court but tied up resources. August 47 planted heroin in a safe house and arrested 2 of Bumpy's most loyal men on felony distribution charges. August 17th, Morrison fabricated a witness statement claiming Bumpy had ordered a hit on a rival dealer named Xavier Dunbar. Bumpy lost $12,000 in seized cash. Lost 2 months of operation. Lost credibility with 3 crew members who thought he was vulnerable. Morrison's confidence grew with each victory. By late August, Morrison was bragging to other cops about how he'd brought Bumpy Johnson to heel. But on August 19th, when Bumpy met with Morrison in a diner on 125th Street, something shifted. Bumpy sat quietly as Morrison demanded $8,000 by Friday or face additional charges. Bumpy listened. He nodded. He seemed defeated. What Morrison didn't see was Bumpy memorizing the diner's lunch clock, noting the waitress's name on her uniform, Sandra, and observing that the booth had a clear line of sight to the street where a man named Tommy was parked in a Cadillac with a camera. That's when Bumpy started his documentation. Not retaliation, documentation. September 2nd, 1961, Morrison made his move. He arrested Bumpy at a restaurant on 131st Street for conspiracy to commit narcotics distribution, citing Bumpy as the leader of an operation moving 10 kilos monthly. The arrest was public, humiliating, exactly what Morrison wanted. Bumpy didn't resist. He went quietly. During processing at the 28th Precinct, Morrison logged false evidence. 2 pounds of cocaine he claimed was seized from Bumpy's apartment, and $3,400 in cash he'd actually stolen from Bumpy's safe 2 weeks prior. He wrote his report at 7:12 p.m., making sure every detail supported a 15-year minimum sentence. Morrison felt invincible. What Morrison didn't see was Officer James Chen, the evidence room clerk who'd been recording which items Morrison logged and which ones disappeared. What Morrison didn't know was that Bumpy's lawyer, Robert Atkins, had already filed 3 separate requests with the FBI investigating Morrison's pattern of false arrests and planted evidence dating back to 1957. Inside his cell on Rikers Island, Bumpy wasn't suffering, he was operating. Within 48 hours, his associates had delivered a message to a journalist named David Rothstein at the New York Herald Tribune. Within 72 hours, that same message reached federal agent Victor Krantz, who'd been building a file on Morrison for 2 years, but lacked one final piece of evidence. Bumpy had that piece. He had photographs of Morrison accepting $400 payments from 3 different dealers, September 1st, August 28th. He had a receipt from a Cartier store dated August 9th, showing Morrison purchased a watch for $895. He had bank deposits that didn't match Morrison's recorded salary. Every piece was placed. Every trap was set. Morrison went home that night thinking he'd finally removed the threat to his operation. He didn't realize he'd just walked into a cage that had been built around him for 6 months. Bumpy's preparation didn't start in July. It started in March. When Morrison first approached him in March 1961, demanding his usual payment from every dealer in Harlem, Bumpy immediately recognized the pattern. Morrison had probably done this to 7 other operations over the previous 5 years. Bumpy hired an investigator, Marcus Webb, to dig into Morrison's finances going back to 1954. Webb found deposits totaling $47,000 over 7 years that couldn't be explained by Morrison's NYPD salary. That was Domino 1. In April, Bumpy had arranged for photographs of Morrison entering known numbers operations and emerging with manila envelopes. These weren't random shots. They were dated, time-stamped, and showed Morrison's face clearly. Tommy, the photographer, had taken 237 photographs between April and August. Domino 2 fell into place. In May, Bumpy had connected with Officer James Chen through an intermediary. Chen was Morrison's conscience, disgusted by what he witnessed in the evidence room. Chen agreed to document Morrison's falsified evidence reports. By September 2nd, Chen had records of 23 instances where Morrison logged evidence that never actually existed. Domino 3 was positioned. Then, Bumpy activated his federal contact. For 3 years, Bumpy's lawyer Robert Atkins had been communicating with FBI agent Victor Krantz about Morrison's corruption. They'd been waiting for concrete financial proof. When Bumpy's bank records arrived at Krantz's desk on September 4th, the investigation transformed from circumstantial to prosecutable. On September 8th, Marcus Webb delivered a sealed envelope to journalist David Rothstein. That envelope contained everything: photographs, financial summaries, dates, and names. Rothstein's editor authorized a preliminary story. On September 10th, the New York Herald Tribune ran the headline, "NYPD Detective Under Federal Investigation for Systematic Evidence Tampering." Morrison saw that headline at 6:15 a.m. while eating breakfast. His toast fell from his hand. His wife asked what was wrong. He couldn't answer. By 9 a.m. that same morning, Agent Victor Krantz appeared at Morrison's precinct with a warrant. Not for Bumpy, for Morrison. The charges: extortion, evidence tampering, bribery, and perjury. 47 counts across 3 decades of service. Morrison's hand shook as they handcuffed him. His voice cracked, asking them to call his lawyer. Meanwhile, Bumpy was still in his cell on Rikers Island, wearing the same calm expression he'd worn since the arrest. Within hours, his legal team filed a motion citing police misconduct and fabricated evidence. The judge, now aware that Morrison had been arrested and was a documented liar, threw out the charges entirely on September 11th at 2:37 p.m. Bumpy walked out of court a free man. Morrison sat in a holding cell, wondering how it had happened. The dominoes didn't stop falling. By September 15th, the NYPD launched a formal investigation into Morrison's entire career. By October 3rd, prosecutors reviewed 23 cases Morrison had testified in and discovered 14 were based on fabricated evidence. 11 of those cases were appealed and overturned. 3 inmates were released from prison that month because of Morrison's lies. Morrison's trial began January 9, 1962. By March 8, he was convicted on 31 counts. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, not the 15 he tried to give Bumpy 12 for himself. Poetic, but not the end of the story. Word spread through Harlem fast. Bumpy Johnson didn't just beat a case, he dismantled the cop using intelligence and patience. Every dealer in the city suddenly understood that the system wasn't invincible. 3 other investigations into corrupt officers were launched within weeks using Bumpy's methodology. Document everything, connect it to federal authorities, leak it to press, make it undeniable. Bumpy's status shifted immediately. He wasn't just a numbers kingpin anymore, he was a strategist who'd outthought the system itself. Protection payments he'd previously given up? Gone. Territory disputes that seemed unsolvable? Suddenly resolved in his favor. Even in prison, guards treated him differently. Respect wasn't something earned through violence anymore. It was earned through outsmarting power. Other criminals took notes. Within 18 months, 3 separate defendants used similar documentation strategies against corrupt officers, all successfully. One woman named Patricia Hayes actually used Bumpy's playbook to document a lieutenant's extortion ring, providing evidence that led to 11 arrests. Bumpy's method became the underground standard for fighting institutional corruption. Morrison died in federal prison in 1974 from a heart attack at age 60. He spent his last 12 years in a cell, disgraced, irrelevant, and forgotten. Meanwhile, Bumpy Johnson became a legend not for what he'd done to enemies with bullets, but for what he'd done to systems with evidence. That story proves something essential about power. Intelligence beats violence every time, if you're patient enough to use it. Bumpy didn't need to kill Morrison. He didn't need to start a war. He needed to understand that institutions, police departments, courts, systems have vulnerabilities that aren't physical. They're vulnerable to truth. They're vulnerable to documentation. They're vulnerable to exposure. Morrison was powerful only because nobody had ever documented his crimes comprehensively. The moment comprehensive documentation existed, his power evaporated. This defined Bumpy's entire legend differently than most people understand it. He wasn't remembered primarily as a violent kingpin. By the 1970s, Bumpy was remembered as a man who understood that the smartest move against an impossible opponent is to use their own system against them. He turned a cop's corruption into his own freedom. He turned a frame job into a government investigation. He turned his own prosecution into his prosecutor's conviction. That lesson extends everywhere. In business, documentation defeats embezzlement. In relationships, clear communication defeats manipulation. In politics, transparency defeats corruption. In life, evidence defeats lies every single time. The strategy that worked against Detective Morrison works against anyone abusing power. You don't fight power with more power. You fight it with truth, weaponized intelligently. Someone observing Bumpy during that period said it plainly: he didn't beat Morrison. He let Morrison beat himself, then showed the judges the evidence of how it happened. That's mastery. March 15, 1962. Facing 15 years. Released same day because Bumpy had spent 6 months documenting a cop's crimes while everyone thought he was losing. If this story proves that patience and intelligence outlast authority, smash that subscribe button. Like if you believe strategy beats violence, comment. Would you have had the discipline to document for 6 months instead of fighting immediately? Next, the time Bumpy outplayed the entire FBI with one phone call. Remember, the sharpest weapon you own is patience.